let me talk to you about a cool feeling in gaming. The world of video games runs on hype. Actually, no, scratch that. We all know it runs on money. But hype is also an incredibly powerful thing that can make or break a game even before it comes out. Now, being hyped for something is a bit of a double-edged sword. We've had games live up to the hype, fail to live up to it, rise to live up to it. We even have games that only really exist as hype. Granted, being excited for a game and it being everything you hoped for and more is an incredible feeling, but let's face it, it's rare. Today I want to talk to you about another feeling, one that is more frequent and sometimes even more rewarding than high expectations being met. The feeling of discovering something new and realizing you like it quite a bit. Enter Sniper Ghost Warrior Contracts 2. A mouthful of a title that I will from now on shorten to Contracts 2. This is a game that I had no idea existed up to a couple of days before I purchased it, from a franchise whose entries I'd never experienced until now. I always knew they existed, they just never got anything better than mixed reviews, and I always seemed to have better things to play. In the case of Contracts 2, Steam recommended it to me, and not only I saw that it had some good reviews, but one in particular caught my attention because of two key phrases. It said that the game takes inspiration from the latest Hitman games, which is a great thing to do, the newer Hitman trilogy is amazing. And it also said that it was a good tactical stealth game, and I thought, yummy, yummy, I haven't had some fine tactical stealth action since 2015 or so. Is it good? Yeah, it's pretty good. But it does have some issues and quirks that you should know about, and that's what we're here for. Let us begin, as we always do, with the narrative and the setting. Contracts 2 is set in Kuamar, a fictional country in what appears to be the Middle East. An unknown benefactor has hired you, a mercenary known only as Raven, to disrupt the current government of the region and eventually replace it with a new one, more friendly to the interests of this third party. Your only contact with the people who hired you is Control, a Jason Statham sounding fella who will provide intel and context to your mission as well as the occasional banter. Now, aside from your targets and enemy soldiers speaking to each other, Control and Raven are basically the only characters in the game. This is very much not a story-driven experience, and what little of it there is only serves to provide a background for the player's actions. This is nothing but a mercenary hired to do a job tale and nothing else. This is all mostly fine, you can't really be mad at the story if there isn't much of it. My only real criticism is that your two characters are not only one note and boring, but whenever they do talk about anything that isn't mission related, they come off as very unlikable. Raven's voice lines sound like they were copied straight out of the I Am Very Badass subreddit.
You're smarter than I pegged you for.
I have to be. Sniping takes a lot of mental math. Distance, gravity, wind speed.
He's also a billionaire, apparently.
Maybe I'll have you do my taxes.
Who pays taxes? Raven out.
Control's dialogue is also pretty strange sometimes.
I can't wait to see how the people react when Western news starts to spread. Control out.
The game is set in 2019. You can't wait to see what the Kuamaris think of all the Donald Trump memes. Their interactions are either very matter-of-factly and based around mission objectives, or just weird and cringy if they talk about other stuff. Another issue with Control is that he talks way too much. I'll get into this later when we talk about the mission design, but the short version of the issue is that he needs to shut the fuck up and let you think. There's way too much hand-holding masquerading as dialogue with Control. The real highlights in the character department are the enemy soldiers. The developers seemingly understood that they were giving you many different ways to end lives in this game and decided to give all the relatability and likable traits to the random guards patrolling the objectives. Just to see how much of a psychopath you are. Here are just some of the things these men will talk about moments before you brutally kill them.
Oh man, this tooth is killing me. I hope I don't need to have it removed. The nearest dentist is miles away. Maybe it's time I brought a cell phone for my kids, so I can get in touch with them while I'm here. Yeah, I never wanted to be a soldier actually. I wanted to study medicine and be a doctor, but never had the time or the money for it.
And my personal favorite, the one that complains about the job being so repetitive and boring, he feels like a character in some video game. You know it, buddy. By the way, in case it wasn't apparent, I tend to fail the psychopathy test in these games quite reliably. I do have fun though. That's mostly all there is to say about this story. Don't play the game for it, you will be disappointed. It just does an okay job at providing the context for the playground, nothing more. Let's talk about more superficial things. The presentation is overall pretty good. Visually it won't blow your mind or anything, but it does look very nice and authentic. Throughout the game you can definitely appreciate the achieved with CryEngine from the beginning. Every region is nicely detailed, characters look good, the weapons look great. The game ran well to me, with no bugs other than some janky animations. Despite the whole game being based around a desert region, the levels are very visually different from each other and have a distinct feel. One mission will be about infiltrating a high-tech base, and another a palace fortress kind of place. Let me think, what else? It sounds good. I like the weapon sounds, and it has detailed blood and gore if you're into those things. The soundtrack is really cool, and is this really all I have to say here? I'm sorry, it must seem like I'm not very good at this. It's just that this is a very gameplay focused game, which is where most of my praise and complaints are. The game is overall unremarkable both narratively and visually. Not bad, mind you, it does its job very well in these two areas. There's just not a lot to say about it. Anyway, let's move on to how you play this game. Contracts 2 is divided into two kinds of missions: classic contracts and long range contracts. The classic contracts consist of a quite extensive open-ended mission area with a few distinct interconnected zones, each with one or several objectives to complete. The interconnectedness of the areas makes it so that you can complete the objectives in whatever time and order you choose. Each time you complete a contract, you have the option to exfiltrate. Here you can choose to leave and return later to complete the rest of your objectives, or maybe change your loadout and continue with the mission. These classic style missions are where most of the sneaking takes place. You have your usual takedown to kill enemies silently, then you can loot their corpse and search for extra ammo and gadgets. The option to carry the corpse somewhere less noticeable or straight up putting it in a container is also there. Enemies can also be interrogated. Interrogation in this game is very useful. When you interrogate an enemy, he will tell you where his friends are. This will cause all the enemies of that particular zone to be marked on your HUD. This makes sneaking and stabbing a lot easier. It might sound overpowered, but getting an enemy to be on his own and out of sight and earshot of his friends can be tricky. Sure, you can be lucky and see a dude patrolling on his own, but a lot of the time they are accompanied. The animation that plays during the interrogation is quite long and leaves you very exposed, so there's a layer of strategy and patience to this. You also have different types of enemies, but in the moment-to-moment gameplay only two of those really matter: snipers and big boys. Snipers, as the name suggests, are perched somewhere maintaining overwatch of an area. It is much harder to sneak past the line of sight of a sniper than a common enemy, so finding them and taking them out first is always a good idea. Then the big boys. You know the kind. You've been killing them since Modern Warfare 2. Lots of armor, big machine gun, cannot be killed in melee. These guys can be a pain to sneak past since there isn't really a panic option available. In a pinch, you can shoot an enemy in the head if they're about to spot you, or maybe a quick throwing knife. These options are not available with the big boys, which is what makes their presence another layer of defense that you have to get around during missions. Speaking of layers of defense, far from being guarded exclusively by men with guns, other obstacles to your progress include drone jammers, military jammers, security cameras, and sentry turrets. Military jammers prevent you from marking hostiles and keeping track of them. They can be disabled. These boxes allow you to hack the cameras. The sentry turrets can be disabled by following their connections. My biggest issue with all of this are the drone jammers. There's nothing you can do about them. In some areas you just can't use your drone and that's it. I get that the drone is a very powerful tool that would make other things like interrogation and surveillance kinda redundant, but it does seem like the developers are cheating a bit by adding them. To use a similar example, the latest Ghost Recon games also have drone jammers in enemy outposts, but these can be disabled or destroyed. I think this could have been another layer of cool side objectives to make your life easier at the cost of a detour instead of just a random constraint in some places of the levels. Then there's the long range contracts. These are more straightforward and consist of a few sniping positions that you have to get to by sneaking past or destroying some enemies that can be found between each spot. Once you get to your spot, you will have an objective to complete, which will not necessarily always be taking out a high value target. Infrastructure sabotage and overwatch are also things you will do in these missions. This is probably a good time to talk about the main attraction of the game, the sniping mechanics. Now you might see in some of my footage that I have this little red dot telling me where the bullet will go, accounting for range and wind. Disable this immediately. You might think, as I did, that you're not ready to take on the raw sniper scope with no assistance and need this hand-holding at least at first. Not only is unassisted sniping not that hard, but it also changes the whole dynamic of encounters in the game. Especially in the highest difficulty, which is very much the one I recommend. I'm gonna break it down real quick. The main obstacle to long-range sniping is the distance. Bullets drop quite substantially in this game and you need to account for that. Luckily, your scope can be zeroed into several distances depending on the scope you're using. Tagging enemies gives you their distance in easier difficulties, but not so in the later ones. Here you will depend on your binoculars or in this little figurine of a man to know the approximate distance. I found the figure unreliable, so I almost always use the binoculars. Let's see with some gameplay. This enemy sniper is 1110 meters away, so you set your scope's axis to 1100 meters. The scope will show you how the wind will affect the bullet with this little white mark here. Since 10 meters isn't that much of a difference, we put the mark right on top of the enemy's head and fire. Another example, this man is 1081 meters away. We leave the scope on 1100 meters and place the crosshairs in his bum, for example. We send it and... As you can see, it's not overly complex or hard to understand, and it results in much more engaging gameplay than just having the red dot tell you where to fire. It changes the whole dynamic of enemy snipers, for example. With the red dot, if a sniper is about to spot you, well, just shoot him. Without the red dot, there's a choice. Do I have time to use my binoculars and see how far he is? Do I risk a shot more or less ranging the distance on my own? Or do I just take cover and hide? It's much more interesting this way and I very much recommend it. Also know that while you can zero in your scope and it tells you the wind direction and intensity, none of this accounts for the movement of your target itself, which you'll have to figure out on your own. The cool slow motion bullet camera can be toned down or disabled, which I did find myself doing the more I played. It kinda breaks the flow of gameplay after the novelty wears off. Keep in mind that these long-range contracts are the ones that require the most suspension of disbelief in the game. For example, one mission requires you to lure a target out of a building by destroying the control panels of a satellite array. Your target comes out, sees the panel with a big 50 caliber hole in it and sometimes even the brains of one of his fellow mercenaries and is like, let's see, what do we have here? Corpses also disappear, which is pretty strange. It's not like the sniper assassin mode in Hitman, where you need to strike enemies down in areas where their body will not be discovered. In Contracts 2 is more about timing, and killing an enemy with enough time to let the corpse just vanish into thin air. As long as you take people down out of sight and earshot of their bodies, you should be fine. You can always draw the attention of your target to get them stationary, or distract their escort to at least isolate them. The ways you go about doing this change very little in each mission, and are almost always a generator that cuts the lights, or a control panel, or some barrels. However, the fact that these are quite simple to get, and are more of a question of timing and patience than actual critical thinking, does not stop Control from constantly reminding you of them. Like I mentioned before, Control, and sometimes Raven himself, will not shut up about these things. You can be doing the literal final mission of the game, on your 4th playthrough, in the highest difficulty, and Control will be like,
Raven, there should be a way to draw their attention. Search for a generator or a fuse box.
It's easy to tune them out after a while, but during your first time playing some missions it can be pretty annoying. They quite literally don't let you be a badass sniper. All this doesn't mean these parts are not fun, by the way. They are very entertaining. On their best moments, these levels feel like a more sandbox version of the Macmillan missions from COD 4, which is great. Just don't think about the logic too much and stop listening to Control. Now, about the progression in this game, it is pretty standard and fine for the most part. Completing contracts and challenges gives you money that you can use to buy weapons and gadgets. Challenges also give you tokens that you can use to unlock upgrades to your mask, suit, and gadgets. Finally, you have intel tokens. These are used along with money to purchase the more advanced weapons in the game. You get these by completing bounties that spawn in certain areas of the classic style missions. There's a couple of issues with the way bounties work in this game. First of all, it's not entirely clear at any time what triggers a bounty to be spawned. You're just exploring the map and Control will tell you there's a bounty. Like I mentioned before, these missions are pretty open-ended and can be tackled in many ways through different paths. Yet the bounties seem to only trigger once you reach an area through a specific path. This means that a bounty can spawn in a zone that you have already passed through and completed. Imagine you decided to murder everyone in that area just to make your life easier. Then you leave and the trail you decide to use to exit the area is the one the game decides you should have come from to enter it. So Control will tell you a bounty is available, you check the map and see it's right where you just came from, and once you get there everyone is on alert and searching for you. Why? Well, they just materialized into existence surrounded by several corpses, so it makes sense they'd be upset. As they stand, bounties are just a task that you complete once and that's it. They never spawn again, so it's actually more like a collectible you find by exploring than an actual objective, if that makes sense. Let's move on to the moment-to-moment gameplay, particularly the AI when you're sneaking around. It has some very good things. For example, when in alert mode you can still silently take down enemies, but they will be able to eventually track down your position, so you will need to actually use real sniper tactics and relocate after a few shots. If you're sniping a base from afar and get caught, some enemies will pull out binoculars and try to find you, giving your coordinates to every other enemy, including some very annoying mortar teams. Also, if you're walking straight up with inside of an enemy and they see you, they just shoot you. There's none of that "I think I saw something there," which makes sense. You can maybe forgive strange movement in your peripheral vision, but if you straight up see a dude walking, you're gonna register what that is, no doubt. Crouching and crawling are better, hiding in some bushes is best. The thing about the AI is that it does start to fall apart during combat. Getting caught and holding your ground in some areas results in enemies blindly charging forward like a horde of zombies, with no more tactics than a grenade throw or two. Sometimes even staying put while you shoot them. Speaking of combat, you can mostly tell that fighting isn't the point of the game. Contracts 2 is best enjoyed trying to ghost areas or taking out threats tactically with your rifle. Most of the jankiness you will see in the enemy AI and its animations will come from combat situations. The rest of the flaws are brought up by the upgrade system. Some of the character improvements in this game are way too overpowered, to the point that I wish I could toggle them off when I unlock them. Sadly, that isn't an option in most cases. For example, one of these skills is being able to take down the big boys, which gets rid of all the cool strategies for getting around them or killing them that I mentioned before. I have a few examples of this. If your mask can auto-tag enemies, it gets rid of the need to recon ahead or interrogate. Did I mention that crouching was good for stealth? Well, one upgrade is better camouflage for Raven, which makes the already sometimes oblivious AI seem straight up stupid when you do anything other than sprinting in full view of an enemy. And by far the worst one is Wraith, which makes it so that walking and running makes no sound. I'm sorry, what? Not less sound, mind you, no sound at all. As you can probably guess, this can lead to some very stupid scenarios. There's one upgrade that gives you a speed boost when you perform a takedown. Look at this. I literally missed the takedown because I was going so fast. I know the whole point of most video games is to get better at them, with both upgrades and new toys so that you can take on greater challenges. But Contracts 2, aside from becoming way too easy, actively makes parts of its own design redundant and the whole less interesting with the upgrade system. If you intend on playing this game, I strongly recommend you think twice about unlocking some of these, because like I said, you won't be able to switch them off in most cases. But forget about all that. The things I mentioned so far are mostly annoyances that you can ignore or play around, and I wouldn't say came any close to ruining my experience. This game does have what I think are two very big flaws that are way harder to ignore. First, the checkpoint system. The fact that it exists at all. This game offers a very nice stealth sandbox experience, with many different approaches and plenty of room to experiment as you play. So why can't players save the game whenever they want? It takes away a lot of the feeling that you can experiment and try out new things. Also, it's not like the checkpoint system is flawless. Think of all the recon and tagging you have to do in the game, especially in the long-range contracts. Say you're in position and begin scouting the enemy base. You find and tag all enemies as well as equipment they have, distractions that you can use. After a minute or two you're ready to fire your first shot and for whatever reason you miss. It happens and now the base is on alert. No biggie, just load the last checkpoint and oh. The checkpoint is before you tagged everything. When getting caught or killed will send you back much further in the level than you'd like, you end up doing what's most effective in most cases instead of experimenting and having fun with the open-ended mission design. And it's a shame because the two classic style contracts are very entertaining to sneak around in. Restrictions and obstacles are placed on the player, but aside from the drone jamming towers I mentioned, these are all like fun challenges to overcome. An area might be surrounded by a minefield, but it isn't a classic minefield that developers just use to stop you from going somewhere. You can see and even disable the mines, so if you're careful and patient, you have the option to sneak around this side of the base, at the risk of getting caught or losing some limbs.
Dismantle mines, yes.
Now to the biggest issue in this game. You may have already noticed it just now when I said the two classic style contracts. Yeah, this game is way too short. Only 5 regions and a tutorial. Add to that the fact that they are divided into 2 very distinct types, so you end up with 2 classic style missions and 3 long range ones. You might think this isn't as much of an issue since they are replayable and have challenges and things to discover, and you'd be right. It would be fine if the quality of the missions didn't start dropping as the game progresses. The first 2 long-range missions have several contracts to complete that, like I mentioned before, go a bit beyond than just assassination. The last one only has 2 contracts. The first classic style mission is honestly the highlight of the game. It is a really well made map from a level design standpoint. There's many things to discover and paths to take, and replaying it gives you the option to start infiltrating in different areas so you can truly tackle objectives as you see fit. It starts in the mountains, but you can discover a huge underground section that interconnects it all. I don't know how much more to say and not spoil it. This mission in isolation is honestly the best Splinter Cell game I played in almost 10 years. It's also the only Splinter Cell game I played in almost 10 years. A couple of missions later, you get to the other half of the classic contracts in the game, and it honestly feels pretty rushed if you ask me. Not gonna go into a huge breakdown and comparison of the entire levels, just gonna show you a scope view of the last play you infiltrate in each one. First, Mount Kuomar. The final section has you infiltrate in this Metal Gear style base. It has an entrance guarded by a layer of sentry turrets, a minefield patrolled by an armored vehicle, snipers, security cameras, and over a dozen enemies. The inside is all tight corridors and catwalks. Then Rashida Kalat. The final section has you infiltrating an old fortress. The entrance is guarded by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys and 2 turrets. Oh, there's a hole in the wall, so forget about the turrets. The inside is also large courtyards full of cover. Add to this the fact that I already had the upgrades unlocked, and it is quite literally a walk in the park in some areas. I think I wasn't even at risk of getting discovered at any point. Your target is also just walking around. It is the main target of the whole game, and you can just find her roaming the patio. All the other sections suffer from similar problems. It all just kinda feels slapped together. So not only you don't have many missions where you sneak around, half of them are not as good as the previous half. There is some sneaking in the long range contract, but nothing too complex, it is mostly just enemies patrolling. The 2 final missions of the game are quite disappointing. The core gameplay is still good, they just don't meet the standards set by the previous ones. One final thing that I think is worth mentioning, I don't personally have a problem with this, but some people do. This game has an obscene amount of DLC for a game that just came out. They're mostly skin packs that don't affect gameplay, but a couple of them are weapon packs, which is kinda shitty to be honest. The game isn't exactly overflowing with arsenal options, and there's some weird limitations. For example, the 2 submachine guns you have cannot equip silencers, but the one in the weapon pack can. Again, not a big deal. I didn't feel like I was missing anything during my time playing the game, and in my personal opinion, if you absolutely have to add these cosmetic options, I sincerely prefer them here on the Steam page and not assaulting me every time I open the game like others do. And that's basically Sniper Ghost Warrior Contracts 2. It doesn't reinvent the wheel of tactical stealth action, but it does add some nice rims, or Continental tires, Bridgestone or something, I don't know, I'm not a car guy. It has the usual stealth game AI quirks that you just have to accept to have fun, like enemies being easily distracted by throwing a rock. What the fuck? But it is overall a pretty good game. I played it for about 30 hours and had a lot of fun. I even went achievement hunting, which isn't something I usually do. It does leave you hungry for more in the best and worst possible ways, which is a shame, but it remains to be seen what the devs will do with the franchise going forward. I think they have a pretty solid concept and gameplay loop in their hands, they just need to expand on it with more levels per game, and maybe different contracts set in the same level at different times of day or the year. Maybe let players create contracts themselves. Imagine having to kill this guy here, but with throwing knives to the knee, and then hide the body on the other side of the map. Basically what I'm saying is just copy Hitman and everything, because it really fits this gameplay like a glove, and I'm very happy to have a new franchise to look out for in the future. Thanks to How to Game Differently for voicing the likable enemy soldiers. You can find his channel link in the description below. And thank you very much for watching. Consider liking and subscribing for more game reviews and other stuff. I have to go now. There are still enemies to dismember.